Welcome to this video where I will introduce you to the analysis of the living being based on the work of an author called Martinus. Martinus had a spiritual initiation when he was around 30 years old that enabled him to see, via what he called intuition, the principles of the world. So he saw some eternal principles, and some of these are the ones that makes us living beings. So what I will do in this video is to introduce you to this analysis Martinus made of the living being. So if you have ever wondered what we are as living beings, what is our I, what is our ability to create, and what is the created, what is that is going on around us, this video might be something for you. Martinus made symbols to enable us to understand these principles and the thinking that he was providing us with. I will explain to you what Martinus symbols are because they're kind of unique, and it's important to understand what they are before we go into the actual analysis of the living being. So stick around if you want to know more about who and what we are as living beings. And if you like the topic and you like the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. That's very much appreciated. And if you have any comments or questions, just please leave them below and I'll be happy to answer. So let's get started. So here we have a symbol. It has a number, symbol number 5, the living being 1. And we'll go into what that is a little bit later in this video. So let's see what Martinus wrote about it. So what he's saying is that the symbol expresses mental or cosmic realities that do not have a physical form. So what's on the symbol is actually something that's there, but it's not like a physical thing that you can go out and say. So you can see here we have 3 sections. So that's actually 3 different principles, and I'll come back to them later in the video. These 3 principles are not something you can go out and measure like you would be able to in, for instance, materialistic science. So they don't have a physical form, but they show some principles that Martinus experienced that are in the world. He called these mental, or more often cosmic realities. So it's definitely something that's there, and it's something where we can observe what comes out of those principles, but it's not something we can directly experience. And in this particular case, Martinus writes about what he calls cosmic realities. And a cosmic reality is essentially something that's eternal. So Martinus says there are some eternal principles that sort of guides or make a structure for the world, and he has described those principles. But these principles do not have a physical form. So you can say the symbols are not a photography of what they represent. They are not a one-to-one thing. They are an expression for something else, basically. So it is a materialistic image, which is not a copy, but a holding point, a hallmark within the physical area of an otherwise invisible reality. So what the symbols are intended to do is to provide us with a sort of accessibility of these cosmic realities within the materialistic area. So when I'm going further in this video, I can actually start pointing towards physical phenomena here. We have the symbols, right? We can see there are 3 areas in this symbol. Come back to what that is. That makes it easier for us to understand what these cosmic realities are. So the symbols are meant to make the accessibility to cosmic realities easier for thoughts we as human beings has not necessarily met before. So the symbols are made to make the analysis that Martinus provides easier for us to understand. So that's the symbols without really going into what they're showing, and that will be the next section of this video. I'll just show you this image. This is Martinus. Not quite sure when it's taken, maybe in the 60s. Martinus was born in 1890 and he died in 1981. And he got this initiation, spiritual initiation, when he was around 30 years old. That enabled him to get this, what he called permanent intuition. So he could actually experience these eternal principles. And what he used his life, the rest of his life, to do was essentially to put out in symbols and in his books what he actually saw in a way so we could understand it. And furthermore, we could actually think through what he has seen. So he provides a lot of arguments, a lot of explanation, tells us what the logic in all of that is. And we will show a little bit of that in this video as well. But I'll just say he made these 100 symbols. And as you can see here, it was at different times back then. He started doing his symbols in the 1920s. So there was no computers or anything. So he was basically making them on a piece of paper, and he had a little bit of color he could put on it, and that was basically it. So he made 100 of those, and you can see them on Martinus Institute's homepage, martinus.dk. So Martinus has a very basic analysis of the living being. This is a symbol of his as well. It's the most simple he has made, and it's called the causeless cause, or the first cause. I should say Martinus is Danish, so if you can actually read this, it's all in Danish, and it has, most of it has been, a big chunk of his work has been translated to English, so it's available. This is the most basic part of the understanding of the living being, and it simply states there are 3 principles that makes up a living being. He calls it X1, X2, and X3, and it's not to make it any kind of mystical anyway, it's just there's a reason for that name convention. But essentially, the first one, the X1, that we know as our I, and that's not the I in our I, but the I in like I do something. I'm recording this video right now. So there's something in me as a living being that actually initiate whatever is going on. And Martinus names this X1, or the I. And we also know as a living being, we're capable of changing things. That's a sign of a living being. We can actually change things. We can do things, right? And we can also experience things. And this is what Martinus called X2. That's the ability to create and perceive. So we have the 2 X's, and the third one is what is created. That's what our I and the ability to create is actually changing. So that's where all the movement is happening in the world. That's the third principle. And Martinus states these 3 principles has to be there. And you can think about it quite easily. You can just take one of them out and see what is left. So if we take out X1, that is the I. So what is left there is basically an ability to create and something created. But there's nothing to actually use this ability to create and change the created. And then Martinus argues, and this is also an example of how he writes things, that if you don't have this I, then, as I said, there won't be any changes. This whatever is created won't change. So he says that there will be an absolute silence, and that is not what we are seeing, right? So this I has to be there. And the same goes with the X2, the ability to create and perceive. If we have an I that actually can direct the ability to create, but there's no ability to create. And if there's no ability to create, how would the ability to create exist in the first place? Anyway, so you have an I and you have something created, but there's nothing to change the created. And again, it comes back to, then there's this absolute silence. That's not what we are seeing, right? You can see I'm changing right now. If you don't agree with it, that's even a change, because a disagreement is also some kind of movement. So he says we really need an X2 to have a living being. And then you can say the same for the X3. There you have the X1, the I, that has an ability to change something, but there's nothing to change. So you have these 3 X's that makes up the living being. And as I just explained, you cannot be without one of them. Then you might ask, what are these 3 things? Are they actually things, or what do they constitute? Now we have just made an analysis that they have to be there. So that's actually the next symbol, and that also provides a little bit more detail on what these three x's are. So just remember, we have x1, x2, and x3. So here we have symbol number 5 again. This is the living being. And here we see again, we have the top here. That's the x1, that's the I. We have an ability to create and perceive. That's this section of the symbol. And here we have the third part of the symbol, which is the x3, or the created. So you can see there are some kind of consistency between the symbols, and you will also see when we come to the last symbol that it actually makes up a whole understanding of the whole world, actually. But for now, we're just trying to understand what is the living being, actually. Important thing to understand here, and that may be one of the most difficult thing to understand in Martinus' work, is that this is not part of the created. It is something else. So it has no details, it has no manifestation, and that's why he has to make his symbols, because there's definitely an I in us, right? I assume we agree that we are able to do something, right? There's something in us that has been with us our whole life. Everything else has changed. Our body, our way of thinking, who we are has changed. But there's this inner kernel in us. And if you think about it, Martinus described it as a seen from sort of the created part of things. It's sort of a blind spot. We cannot see this I we have, but it's definitely there, right? We see it all the time, right? If you say, "Oh, Lasse, you're not right about this," that's your I that has actually created that reaction. Anyway, so this I is just something there is, but it has you can say, it can use the ability to create and perceive to actually change things. So that's the analysis Martinus is making here. He's splitting up the living being into three principles. He says this is a unity. He calls it the triune principles for a reason, because you cannot separate them. But in an analytical way, you actually can, in order to understand. So in practice, the real world, these three are always together. But when we actually talk about it here, we separate it in order to understand what is going on. So we have this I, and here we can see with a little bit more details, we have some abilities to create. And he talks about something he calls talent kernels, and that's essentially when we learn things, when we experience things, these, I think he calls it super consciousness. I know what the Danish word is, but let's just call it super consciousness for now. I might be wrong. That's the eternal part of us, where whenever we learn something, that is actually stored here. That part of the living being determines what can actually be created. That's our abilities. And we know from our own life that these abilities change over time. We can actually be better at things. We develop as living beings. So that's the ability to create and perceive that we see here as well. A little more details. And here we have the created, and it has gotten way more details. We have these 6 different colors, and Martinus talks about that everything is created with it based on these 6 basic energies. So everything we experience, everything has some level of these 6 energies, but at the end of the day, the differences in how they're combined makes up everything that we experience. And they can be combined in unlimited ways. So it's not like we will go out of opportunities to have new life experiences. So, and I will come back to how they actually work together on the next symbol. So we see that the created is made up of these 6 basic energies. And here in this round circle, that actually symbolizes our physical body, this orange color here. And this cross actually shows that there are some kind of perfection to what is going on, or be perceived like that. So there's some kind of meaning behind what is going on. And we'll come back to that. Maybe not in this video, but at least in other videos. So we got a little bit more details on what the living being is. We still have the 3 axes, and now we can actually see that when we get close to what is created, we get all the details. And the created is where we get all the details. And we also learned that the X, the X1, the I in us, doesn't have any details because it's not a created thing. It's not manifested. That's what Martinus would say. But it has the ability to create the created. And a creation is changing something. So it's not that there comes more things into the world. It's just whatever was there is changed to something else. That's creating things. That's a movement. So the X3 is also the world of movements. That's where everything, the big, the small, the lovely, the things that are hated and so forth, that's perceived here by the X2 and is actually ending up in X1. So this could actually be the analysis of the living being, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, right? So let's try to see if we can actually relate this a bit to what is going on in the actual real world, so to speak. So I brought this symbol, and that's a whole video in itself. It's symbol number 6. It's called the combination of the basic energies. So what this symbol shows is how our eternal life, Martinus states we have an eternal life, is actually developing or is changing over time. So if we start at the bottom here, we can see there are some combination of the 6 basic energies. I'll talk a bit about what they are. And we can see they change over time. At some point they reach their max, and then over time they go to the minimum, and then they start growing again until they hit the same. And this goes for all 6 energies. And you can see every state here, the one with the maximum. I should say that the basic energies here are more like a conscious thing. So that's what our consciousness is made up of. Also the physical world, but the Martinus states that the mental part of us come before the physical world. So the physical world is actually an expression of something mental or spiritual. So what this combination of energies are in our consciousness is actually what we express in our creation. I hope that makes sense. I think it will make more sense when we go into what the actual energies are. So what we see here is essentially that there's development, and it all comes back to where we started, at least in principle. So Martinus talks about eternity, and the thing here is that his definition of an eternal thing or eternal principle is that if we take the first one here, it actually ends up where the next one starts. So you can imagine that this just go over and over. It just keeps going in a circular way. So every time we have been through these 6 stages, we sort of start where we begin, at least in principle. The things that we are experiencing are different, but the principle behind them are the same. So you can ask, okay, so where do we see things like this? Well, we see it pretty much everywhere. We see it day to day, right? We have a morning, we have an afternoon, we have an evening, and we have a night, and then it starts over the next day. We can see it with the year. It's the same. We have winter, spring, summer, fall, and so forth. We have our life. We start as we are born, babies. We're young, we are adults, we get old, and then we die at some point. And Martinus will say, well, he has reincarnation in his image, world picture, so we'll get a new life at some point, new physical life, and then we'll start the same circular thing again. And you can probably see it in a lot of other things, that's what's going on. So the whole world, everything we experience, is based on some circular thing. So let's talk about what this is. So this is the first one here. That's let's start here with this one. That's the minerals. Martinus states there are also some kind of consciousness behind the minerals, but the minerals are not on the physical plane. They are on the mental or the spiritual, or in the spiritual world. So their whole world, their daily experiences, so to speak, are happening in the spiritual world. So that's why we cut our hair, that's mineral material, without feeling any pain. If we cut something else, like a finger or something, they are living. There are living beings in here that will actually react to that and that will hurt us. But the minerals, they are so not on the physical plane, it doesn't hurt. They don't react to it basically. So in this state, we have what Martinus called memory energy. So they're essentially living in a world where they remember everything that has been going on in the rest of this circular thing. So let's come back to that when we have gone through the 5 others. So, but these develop as living being, and we have another energy here. That's the second one. That's the instinct. It's sort of an automatic function, and it's also something that provides you awareness. So what will give awareness in the world? Well, Martinus states that that's where we see all the plants, and these are based on instinct. So they have some idea, some awareness of what is going on. One of the examples are the trees. They have their roots. They can actually direct them towards water. Some of the plants can actually close in the evening and open up again in the day. But they really don't have a real thinking on the physical plane, but they have an awareness. So we see here that things are starting to develop. So that's actually where the whole thing begins, on the physical plane. That's where you start experience something on the physical planes. And then we have the next area. That's the animal kingdom. And Martinus actually states that we are still part of that. We are still have a lot in common with animals, but we are starting to develop out of the animal kingdom. We are starting to become what he calls real human beings. So anyway, in this area, we have what he calls gravity energy as the main thing. And that's sort of an explosion goes out in the world, basically. And mentally, that is where we saw the plants having an awareness. We see here that's this gravity energy. And we see it what comes into basically being an egoistic way of living. That's being closest to yourself. We see that predators, right? They need to have this where they go completely into themselves in some ways and just have one focus, and that's killing to survive, basically. So the whole animal kingdom is and be strong in order to survive. And we see here that this whole instinct, this automation is starting to wear off. This gravity is coming in, and the next energy, feeling, that's the ability to experience, basically. And the next two ones are intelligence. So intelligence has starting to grow, which we can also see in our day-to-day life. That at least that's my assertion, that we have become more intelligent. We are, at least if you look over, let's say 2 or 5 or 10 years, 10,000 years, we can do way more today because we have intelligence than we used to. And then we have the next one, that's intuition, and that's this thing that Martinus also got, and that's an ability to automatically see facts. And we don't have that right now, and that's why we don't know really what the world is. We are kind of in the dark of what the solution to the mystery of life is. So that's the reason for that, basically. And we can also see our ability to remember, memory in energy is being reduced, basically. And this is something that happens to us automatically. We don't have to think about it. It just happens. We do a lot of this freely because we want it, because Martinus talks about something called hunger and saturation. When we experience things, for a while, we are hungry for it, and it gives us joy, but at some point we start to get saturated by that type of experience and we want to move on. I'll come back to that in the last symbol. Anyway, Martinus states that we are not finished as living beings. If development will go on, and we'll see that feeling and intelligence and this intuition starts to kick in. And he states, basically, to make it really brief and short, that we will evolve from these egoistic animal beings into what he called real human beings. So instead of living for ourselves, which is the animal way of doing things in order to survive, we will get into a state where we will actually start living to serve others. And we know this from Christianity as neighborly love. It's in a logical way, right? So it's good for everyone, basically. That's the idea with it. Anyway, so we at some point evolve into real human beings, and we'll get this intuition where every one of us at some point will start to be able to see these principles or understand these principles ourselves. It's not just something we have to read about. We'll still have a physical way of living, and I have to do this a little bit brief. We'll keep evolving, and at some point we'll stop being physical beings, and we'll get into what Martinus called the higher spiritual worlds. And there are basically two of them. There's one where intelligence is the main one, and he says that's the highest point of engineering in a way, and art. This is where, I mean, if you look at our body, it's really, really a complex thing. It's probably the most complex thing we have. I mean, our computers and all that technology and things and art as well that we're doing, but try to compare to how our body works. We barely understand what is going on. It's that complex. These things are thought, are created here. Well, the sort of the template, the blueprint for them are made in the higher spiritual worlds. And that's also why we see that the intelligence has the highest one. This is still neighborly love and a pleasant way of living, and this is where we can get to the highest of creating things, basically. But it keeps evolving, get a little bit saturated by that. And then he says the intuition plane here is basically, the intuition is also something that gives ideas. So we hear it from artists that just see their whole book in one split second, or a scientist who sees the whole solution to a thing in a split second. That's the intuition that kicks into their consciousness. And he says this is, and we can see here there's barely anything of it where we live right now, and here it's at its max. So this is the world where ideas comes from. And this is also the first step out of sort of being active. Getting ideas is probably still something active, right? But the living being here starts to be saturated by doing things, basically. So what Martinus explains is that at some point, this living being starts to go into its inner world, into the memories of things. And at this point, everything is well explained and logical. And he says he talks about gold copies. And I'm not going to go into what that is, but it's essentially a very pleasant way of seeing your previous lives, basically. Memory energy is at its max here. So what this living being is able to is basically see this whole, at least one, maybe more than one, of these circular things here, and is enabled to re-experience the whole thing. So it essentially starts living in its inner world. And now we come back to this hunger and saturation thing, right? So even that at some points, even though it's the highest of all pleasures you can get because you are experienced everything and there's no resistance, you don't really have to do anything. It's all created before, right? You have lived it already and you can memorize it. And then at some point that gets saturated as well, and you start to long for something that is a contrast, basically. So that's where you start. And now we are here again, right? Then you start to long for the contrast, which to the spiritual world is the physical world. So that's where you start to manifest first as a mineral, later as a plant, and then you sort of get your highest point in the physical world in the animal kingdom, and you get to experience that contrast. You get saturated by that, and you long back to the higher spiritual worlds. That's peace and those kind of things. That's essentially where we are right now. We might not completely know it, but that's pretty much where we are. And then you go through this again, and that keeps coming. So that's the combination of the basic energy in a very brief version, I will have to say. So let's go to the last symbol and see how that is laid out by Martinus. So this is his main symbol, symbol number 11, the eternal world picture. So that's the whole thing in one symbol. It doesn't have all the details, but you can see it has a lot of details. It's also called the living being 2. So this is also about the analysis of the living being. And the third part of the title is the eternal Godhead and the eternal sons of God. And I'm not going to go too much into the last part, besides saying that we are, if this is the living being, Martinus states that we all exist of micro living beings. So our organs, cells, and atoms are also living beings. And if we take the definition of God, that is essentially everything that exists, and we are all living beings in God. Anyway, that's not for now. So basically, if we take this one, we see how it evolves, right? And we have these 6 kingdoms, and we see them here again, right? So we have to read this symbol. Here we have the created part. That's this circular part where we see the 6, let's call them kingdoms. We have the memory part of it. We have the plants, we have the animals, and we see the earth here where we are. This is what we can see. And here we go from the animal kingdom to the real human kingdom. And this is where we get this initiation, as Martinus said he had, right? So he could write all these things. This is where we get this permanent intuition, and we slowly go out of the physical kingdom, or the physical part of the world, and we get into the higher. This is where the intelligence was, or is. That's where we have all the higher engineering, as I like to call it, because I have a little bit of engineering. I'm an IT guy, so I like that. And this is sort of the higher spiritual worlds where all the ideas are from. And this is where we get saturated again, and we come back. And we can see we have all these small circular things. This is the eye of a lot of living beings, and they're always living being in all 6 areas. So it's always occupied. There's always something or someone that keeps the world going. So we have living beings that are in front of us, and we have living beings that are behind us. And that's always the case. And we can see each one of them has the ability to create, and they live in each area. And we can also see this whole symbol as one living being. So this would be our eye. This would be this thing around it, would be our ability to create. Obviously, we wouldn't have all 6 areas in the higher states, but we can actually, and Martinus describes that we actually have these 6 energies, as I started out by saying, in us. And I already talked about, we have the mineral part of us. That's the nails and hairs and our bones. We don't really have any reaction from that, right? And then we have the plant area. Martinus says that's actually our muscles. I cannot give the real good explanation for that, but that's what he says. And then we have the gravity area, that's the animal part, and that's our digestion, that's our stomach. We have this area of feeling, that's where we breathe, basically. We have our intelligence, might not come as a surprise that that's our brain. And then we have the intuition part, and that's that's related to sexuality. I have to check what the real words are for that. I'll put it on the screen. So that's essentially, we can essentially see that these 6 basic energies are part of our body. In this symbol, we can actually see that goes around, at least we can imagine it goes round and round, right? It never stops. So that's what makes it eternal. So what makes this an eternal analysis of the living being? Well, we have the I, right? There's no manifestation, there's no change. So if there is an I that's above the ability to create and the created, at least in function, that's eternal, right? It doesn't change. So it has been there all the time. And then we have the ability to create and perceive. It changes over time. But the ability to create must always have been there. Because if there are no ability to create, you cannot change anything at all. How would that ability to create come into existence? That's Martinus' argument for that. So it has always been there. And then we have the created. Well, every creation is obviously something that is limited in time. A movement has started somewhere and it will stop somewhere. So the individual creation is timely. But the phenomena of something created, as we can see here, it changes all the time. But that change has always been there and will always been there. So the analysis of the principle of having something created is eternal. And that also goes into a point Martinus has, that if you really want to say what the created is, the only thing you can say about it is that it's something there is. Because if you start saying it's big or small or it's lovely or hateful or anything like that, you are into only having a part of it. So if you want to describe everything that is created, you have to say it's something there is. And the same goes with the ability to create. It has always been there. You might be able to say, okay, there's a little bit, as we saw on this symbol right now, the ability to create is a little bit different than here and there. But if you have to take the whole description of what the ability to create is, you have to say it's something there is. We cannot put any details on it, because as soon as we do that, it's only a fraction of it. It's not the whole thing. And the I is obviously something there is, because there's no details. So you cannot say it's big or small or anything. It's just there. So that also shows that the same analysis basically goes for all three X's here. Something there is. And that's also why it's a unity. It's this triune principles. So you cannot say, okay, over there is the X1, over there is the X2, or here is the X3. All three of them are everywhere. The analysis of the living being is essentially, we have an I, we have the ability to create, there's something created that is changing by the ability to create, and we have an ability to perceive that change. That's essentially the living being. It has a lot of consequences. If we are eternal living beings, we have eternal perception of life, basically. So what is that? And that is basically this plan Martinus is describing here. It has a lot of influence on, we don't have a one life situation where our life starts when we are born and we are gone when we die physically. That perception becomes something different. I'll not go into this in this video, but we have an eternal life basically. So what Martinus states is that we need to understand what that is. What is the plan for us right now? And briefly stated, the plan for us, we can basically see it on this symbol, right? Is that we have come so far in the animal kingdom. We can also see it here. We are so high here in the animal kingdom that a large part of us is now humans. So we have a little bit of animal, we have some animal, part of the animal kingdom in us, and we have some of real human kingdom in us. And the idea here is essentially that we have to leave this animal part of us behind, because we are past it in a way. But we don't have the ability yet to live as real human beings. So we are in a way this Sphinx being that we see in front of the pyramids in Egypt. So yeah, so that's the plan right now. We have to go from the animal kingdom to the real human kingdom. These analysis, this view on the world, actually makes a difference on how we are perceiving things. So it actually makes a difference in the world. Anyway, if you like thoughts like this, if you like seeing symbols like this, if you want to hear about other topics, Martinus wrote about a lot of different things. He wrote about 10,000 pages, and some of this is something like what I have presented in this video, but there are also day-to-day stuff. Basically, a lot of Martinus things is about the mental part of things. So there are also how we should, the praying, there are food, there are, again, not recipes, but what is the real ideal food, sickness, relationships, also a lot about societies, things like that. So if you want to know more about that, and I'll provide more video over time, please subscribe to the channel. And if you found this video valuable in any way, please give it a like. And if you have any comments or questions or anything, I know some of this has been quite briefly, feel free to put a comment below and I'll be happy to answer comments, questions, and so forth. And thank you for watching.